Hey everybody, so new week, new album to review, and this week we have Amy Winehouse, Back to Black. So, let's kind of dive deep into why this album gets a perfect rating for me. Okay, so let's go back to when this album was released. It was released in 2006, October 27, 2006 to be specific. Wow, that was 12 years ago, which is crazy. But anyway, if you look back at the music of that time, this certainly isn't what... This album is not the sound of radio at that time, or the sound of popular music at that time. It was heavily jazz influenced, had live instrumentation, a lot of R&B influence on it, and so it wasn't made for radio, and it wasn't made to, be loved by young, 10-year-olds, This was her second album. Her first album was released in 2003, and it was called Frank. But this album was not heavily released in the U.S. or across the world. It was very successful in her home country, which was England. But that provided that fueled the momentum of this album. And so she wasn't a completely new name going into this album, at least in certain countries. But it finally came out in the U.S., and it was refreshingly honest. It was dark, it was sad, but her voice was amazing. The subject of the album varied from a lot of different subjects, drug use, alcohol, to her personal relationships with herself and her boyfriend at the time. And when this album was released, or around the time it was released, she got a lot of publicity for her drug use and alcohol use. It was definitely tabloid fodder, her and her boyfriend at the time, who actually ended up going to jail. So it was kind of a media frenzy internationally with this album, which kind of was immediately acclaimed and successful, but we had the artist having a lot of erratic behavior in public, and a lot of that was explained on the album. Now we know that Amy Winehouse eventually died several years later of drugs and alcohol, which was extremely sad. And if you look back to a lot of the lyrical content on this album, you'll see that, she was really struggling with a lot of demons. But it made the music better. It made it refreshingly honest in a way that a lot of music isn't at that time or at this time. And it was also, just so different from the music of the 2000s. It sounded like it was from a completely different era. It was fascinating, and I think it's aged extremely well. There were some singles released from this album. We had Rehab, which is really the song that caught a lot of people's attention. This could have been because also of the media attention she was receiving for being in rehab one second, out the next, using drugs one moment, out the next. I mean, it was a frenzy, like I said before, but it drew attention to this song. And I think everyone knows this song. Everyone remembers this song. It's catchy, but like I said before, it's completely different than anything else. What other songs can you hear someone, a pop star, essentially, talking about people wanting them to go to rehab and them not going? But also the jazz and all the different musical influences that went into it. It made it an extremely effective and kind of hypnotic song immediately when it was released, and it went top 10 in the US. The album was selling like crazy. It was doing extremely well. There were some other singles from the album, You Know I'm No Good, which I think is probably one of my top two favorites of the album, along with Back to Black, which obviously is the title track. Back to Black is, if there's one song that's very sad and heart-wrenching on the CD, it's definitely that one. Look up the lyrics to this one. It's basically about someone you've been in a relationship with or had a relationship with moving on to someone else, and then you're left in this position of darkness and blackness. So I understand why that song was given the title of the album. Two extreme favorites of mine, and I think it speaks to this album's staying power and how many people it can appeal to, because I'm not, and especially when the album came out, I was so young, and I do remember even liking some of the songs then, but I was, and still today, I'm not a huge jazz listener. I'm not, I do like some mainstream music, I like a lot of mainstream music, and it blended a lot of genres that I don't typically listen to and made it, but it still was extremely interesting and, refreshing for me to listen to. So that's why I give it 5 out of 5. 12 years later, it's still at the top of my playlist to this day. I have to say rest in peace, Amy Winehouse, and you made a great album with this. Alright, until next week when I'm going to be giving a review of Rihanna's Anti.